Hello and welcome to the Anorak Review Show with your host, the Anorak. I want to start this episode off with a bit of a question or debate. What exactly makes a concept album? Or at least, what's the definition of such? Is it an album that tells a particular story and narrative, like a musical or an opera? Does it have a couple of underlying themes that run across most of the course of its tracks? Or is it just an album that experiments with different ideas and layers them with repeating motifs? Well, a particular band named Jethro Tull has kind of been in the backborder for some time. One album of theirs, which I'm looking at today, is Aqualung. This is one that many people have considered to be a concept album, and yet the band themselves have kind of been in denial of that. They said it wasn't intentional, but regardless, the publicity would eventually inspire them to create what is considered to be one of the greatest prog albums of the 70s, and pretty much a satire of that kind of genre, being thick as a brick. But I'll get into that another time. But today, let's take a listen at Aqualung and see if it really is a concept album in some way or another. Beginning, of course, with its titular opening track, Aqualung. What I would consider this to be a sort of character study of an individual homeless man, and going into depth of how he has these somewhat pedophilic thoughts with lyrics like eyeing little girls with bad intent and watching frilly panties run, but it also offers some sympathy to this character from a third person perspective, as if from a friendly person or even a higher source. So in a way, it kind of deconstructs the whole homeless man archetype or stereotype. It offers empathy, and it was actually inspired by a series of photos that were given to the lead singer of Jethro Tull, Ian Anderson, by his wife, who also wrote some lyrics of this particular song, which is quite interesting. Not often you'd have a husband and wife write a song together. Another similar case that comes to mind when thinking of this would be David Gilmour and Polly Salmon, when they both wrote some lyrics for the Division Bell album. The song then goes on to compare his breathing to like the sounds of a deep sea diver, hence the name of the track Aqualung, and it pretty much refers to this individual by the name of Aqualung, as if he never really had a name, or if he did, he must have forgotten it due to bad memory or whatnot. On top of it, the lyrics also offer a little brief shout out to the Salvation Army, which I think is a pretty nifty shout out. Another thing I really like about this song is the somewhat changing of moods and tones almost naturally away across this 6-minute track. It starts off loud, chunky, and harsh. Then the next in couple of verses, then the next few verses, it somewhat calms down and offers a bit of care and hope, and it builds up on that sense of optimism, and then it bookends on that kind of harshness. It kind of does paint this kind of mixed, almost harsh environment. It definitely paints a picture of what it feels like to be homeless, to be without a job, to be out living on the streets, begging and pleading for money, and I think it's still kind of a relevant song to this day, even after 50 years. It's still relevant. How interesting is that? Continuing on, this is the next track, Crosseyed Merry. Another sort of character study, this time on a schoolgirl prostitute character. One who's kind of bored and tired of being around schoolmates of her age and prefers to lech off the greys. By that I assume they mean older men. And it even gives a bit of a name drop and shout out to the character of Aqualung from the last song, which I guess does well in carrying on that kind of theme. Like this is like telling a kind of story through all these kind of characters, and I would say the word story kind of lightly. Uh, the lyrics go on to say that how she's not entirely, how like Aqualung, she's not entirely all that piece of a lowlife as she may appear. She's been described. The lyrics kind of compare her to like the Robin Hood of Highgate, as in she takes money from rich men and kind of gives it over to poorer men, as if she's not just all there for sex and money for herself. She might have some good intent, which I guess does offer a good equal amount of sympathy from the singer. Ian Anderson does well with the vocals here. In fact, he does. I mean, he's pretty much a great songwriter and singer in general. It also kind of the music is also just as well. It starts off the sort of slow but gradual build up between the flute and the mellotron. I mean, any song with a mellotron is good in my book. And then it kind of delves up and implodes into a sort of folky, funky rock track, which reminds me a bit of King Crimson, which is another great band from this period. You know. Next is a very short song, and I do mean very short, titled Cheap Day Return. This was apparently written by Ian himself while he was returning from visiting his father in a hospital who was apparently critically ill at the time. What few lyrics there are kind of like an old man's ramblings, like what is he kind of doing, just standing around and whatnot, mentioning Preston Station, brushing off cigarette bits off his shoes, and someone asking for his autograph. It's not exactly as deep as, say, the previous two tracks, but I still think it kind of delves into that kind of slice of life theme that they kind of continued onward. So it may not intentionally be a concept album. It still shares something of a theme. If I'm maybe I'm just over interpreting it. I don't know. Then there's the next song, Mother Goose. Much more acoustic, at least compared to the previous songs. This one has a much more kind of fairy tale kind of feel to it, mentioning such characters like Johnny Scarecrow, Long John Silver, and of course Mother Goose, while giving it that kind of temporary 1970s London feel, mentioning places like Hampstead Fair and Piccadilly Circus. And I also think this song might be singing from the perspective of Aqualung himself. Whether or not he's actually seeing all these things, or he's just a bit crazy or delusional, or how he sees things, it's just all in his head, him hallucinating or whatnot. It is honestly up for interpretation. That's another thing I love songs like these, is that they never really make it entirely clear. Same way how it's not meant to be a concert album, but still people interpret it as such. It's up to your interpretation. This one's another short but very sweet song. Following that is Wandering Aloud. Much shorter than the other songs, though not as short as Cheap Day Return. This one clocks in about almost 2 minutes. This continues on the acoustic music tone in a way, while adding some orchestral strings, which I really like. They're very beautiful and grandiose and harmonic. Its lyrics, however small, simple and vague, are just that, simple, vague and minimalistic, which I think works well, and works well open to interpretation. Like, is it about the after effects of having sex, or is it just a simple love song, ambiguously or unambiguously? It's short, but it's definitely another sweet and beautiful song of theirs. The first side of the album ends with the song Up to Me, much more groovier and funkier compared to the previous song so far. Its lyrics speak from the point of view of someone who's been down on his luck, or someone who's a friend of that person who's down on luck, coming up to them as if they're a god where you ask for forgiveness. It definitely definitely carry on that theme of the relationship between man, God, and religion and all that a lot of people have often interpreted this album as. I also know that one of the lyrics makes a reference to a yellow-fingered smoky girl, which is obviously referencing someone smoking, but could this smoky girl be Crosseyed Merry? That's something we could decide on, or at least something that you could decide on. But ultimately, what the song is ultimately about is it's just a reminder of how whatever you do, whatever you say, whatever you let happen to you is ultimately your decision. There's no big meaning of life, no predestination. Just you make your choices. You'll ultimately make mistakes every now and then, but what's important is that you learn from them and grow to be kind of a better person. That's how I see it after all. Side 2 of the album begins with the 7-minute piece, My God. Definitely the longest song in the album. This one is more critical of not exactly all religion in general, but rather the organized and politicization of religions. Taking what is supposed to be a good message of goodwill towards men, love thy neighbor, and just reducing it to just a dogmatic authority, kind of like the Northern Lights or the Dark Material stories. It still has that prog rock vibe that you'd come to expect from bands like this, with the rocking guitar and of course that raw flute that just the icing on the cake. This is probably one of the more epic pieces of an already epic album, and this one alone is definitely definitely the highlight alongside the title song. That religiously critical mindset continues with the next song, Hymn 43. What exactly happened to the previous 42 hymns is up in the air. But regardless, this is another classic rock and roll track of the 70s. It's lyric with recurring lyrics such as Jesus save me and if Jesus save, he better save himself. So it's not exactly so once again, it's not bashing all religions or saying that all religions are bad. It's just that there are those who are willing to abuse it for their own gain. There are just those who are in it for the fame or the fortune, just like anything else really. Ian refers to those people as gory glory seekers, which, now that I think about it, does sound like a pretty interesting name for, say, a Jethro Tull tribute band or something. Wonder if there was ever a band that had that name. I guess I'll find out soon. Then we have the next song, Slipstream. Definitely the shortest song of the album, clocking out about a minute and a quarter at most. Its lyrics carry on a sort of vague yet religious vibe of sorts. It speaks about the feeling of fame and how it's kind of not how in the end it's all that fame and fortune is not exactly as meaningful and fulfilling as one may believe or anticipate. Especially when you come close to your time of dying and eventually meeting God and the high heavens and all that. And has also captured that feeling of dying and pointless, and it is captured in its music as well. It starts off with a somewhat sweet and soothing harmony of the acoustic guitar and some backup strings. And as soon as the lyrics finish and it comes to its short end, the strings just kind of sway and distort, almost as if reality itself just starts changing around you. It really does give off that kind of uneasily uncertain vibe that I think they did. If that's what they were going for, that's kudos. They accomplished that very well in that song. Then there's the song Locomotive Breath. What would a locomotive breath smell like, by the way? Could it be like, would it smell like coal and fumes? Who knows. I'm talking about the song Locomotive Breath. Much like Hymn 43, this one also became a single off the album. And hearing it, it's hard not to see why. Its rhythm is very catchy and unique. It was apparently made to intentionally replicate the chugging of a train. And considering its lyrics, it's kind of fitting in that regard. It, carrying on the themes of being low life, dragged on by society, the lyrics speak from a person who's been carrying so much weight in his life, being a deadbeat job in a dead-end street, being a metaphorical locomotion, feeling almost as if pressured, stressed, and almost to the point of feeling almost as if death is the only thing that could free you from such internal and external suffering. All that stress and baggage and luggage and all that are represented by the metaphorical passengers that he carries along the way. And so much of that just drags him to the point of almost praying for, of course, a god, which has been something of a recurring theme for most of the album. So I have to wonder, if it wasn't intentionally a concept album, were they still considering themes when making this album? Who knows? The album Aqualung ends with the song Wind Up, or Wind Up. It often depends on the pronunciation in terms of the context, really. This song is a definite worthy ending to this album. It brings together all the themes of most, if not all, the previous songs up to this point. Relationship with God, homelessness, overpopulation, fears, dying, and all that, and wraps it all together into a fitting resolution. It gives off its music and its lyrics give off a almost sense of optimism, even with a little bit of sarcasm here and there. The sense of hope and enlightenment of this ballad is also represented in its music. It starts off with a build-up of an acoustic guitar and a bit of flute and piano, and by the middle it explodes into like a climactic guitar riff, and eventually by the end it calms back down to earth, metaphorically, figuratively, and it delves into a calm piano and guitar and fades out, and the album ends. Worthy ending to the album. Overall, Aqualung is definitely an epic album from a classic band. Sure, it may not entirely be a concept album of a traditional sense or an intentional sense, but after listening to it, analysing its music and its lyrics, it's not hard to see it in such a light. If you want to get into prog rock bands, especially Jethro Tull, this one's a definite look. And if it weren't for Aqualung, we wouldn't have Thick as a Brick. So, I'd recommend this album in the end. Next time, we take a look at something a bit more modern, but still equally classic, as we celebrate the 20th anniversary of Gorillaz.